So I've done some videos on things to look for when picking out a 3D printer, specifics for this printer, on pros and cons for it, how to set it up, how to get your first print, settings, your slicer settings. I've done videos on things you can add and all sorts of stuff. So another common question when you first get a 3D printer, you say is, okay, what am I printing with? What is the material I'm going to print with? And it turns out there's lots of different material you can print with. And with every printer, it'll come with a list of material you can print with. And with this, it has a list. It says ABS, PLA, XT copolyester, PET, TPU, TPC, FPA, PVA, HIPS, jelly foam, and Felty. And you're like, huh? I've heard of ABS, maybe. Maybe I've heard of ABS pipe, but I haven't heard of any of these acronyms or anything. I'm like, jelly? You don't know what it is. So you start looking and you say, what can I print with my 3D printer? And 99% of the time, what comes up is PLA. And what does PLA stand for? It doesn't matter. You just have to know that PLA is the most common. If I had to make up a percentage, I would say 95% of all 3D prints are PLA. I totally made that up, but I bet it's pretty close, especially with consumer 3D printers. With commercial grade, I'm sure they use other stuff, but the most common 3D printed material is PLA, and for good reason. It's low temperature. It's relatively low. You can print between 190 and 210. It looks very good. It's clean. There's not a lot of tweaking and there's not a lot of oozing. It prints very clean. You don't need a heated print bed. It'll print right on a normal print bed. If you use some masking tape or some other stuff, you don't have to have a heated print bed. It's very easy to print with. There's not oozing. Everything comes out pretty good with PLA. There are downsides, like it's brittle. If you see it, here's PLA right here, and you can snap it right off. You can just snap a piece right off. Some PLAs are much easier to snap. They snap very brittle. They'll just snap right off. Sometimes if it's been heated, it's got a little more characteristic. Like these are all just snapping right off. So PLA is very good, but it's also very brittle, which means when you have a final part, if it's structural or some sort of knob or handle or hook, it's not going to bend, it's just going to break all of a sudden. And even if you use heavy infill or anything like that, so it's brittle. But other than that, PLA is great for lots of stuff. It prints very accurate, clean parts. The next thing you'll hear about is ABS. Now, I haven't printed with ABS and I don't plan to, because I read that it has not toxic gases, but it has hazardous gases from the melting plastic. And I have a 2-year-old here, and I don't plan on printing with ABS. I'm sure there's some advantages to it. It's bendier, it's a little bit stronger, it prints at a higher temperature. But if I did print with it, I would have to use a fan, and I have this dryer vent hose I would have to connect to my enclosure, which I made an enclosure. I'll do a video on that, and I would have to have a fan and run this outside. From what I've read, the gases aren't very, unless you're sitting in an enclosed room for a year breathing in these gases, there might be something, but there's not a lot of evidence out there saying it's toxic or anything. They said it just might be hazardous in the parts per million if you're in the same room, but I have no reason to print with ABS, so I don't plan on it. One thing I am interested in is nylon. Nylon can print extremely strong parts. If you ever see breaking strengths of all these tested filaments, and lots of people do really good tests on filaments, they'll print a piece and they'll break it, and some of these prints are at 500 or 600 or whatever their units are, and nylon is double that. Nylon is way up there, and they're great for printing gears and really, really strong parts. There are disadvantages with nylon. You'll print it at minimum 250 degrees Celsius, which the maximum that this goes up to is 250. So that's really stretching what a small printer like this can do. Other printers can get up to the 280s and stuff like that for nylon. So there is some nylon that you can print with this, and I'm going to try printing some nylon on this, but you're not going to get that good adhesion between the layers and it might jam up. So it'll be really stretching what this printer can do, but if I can get nylon to print with this, it'll be great. I can print really strong structural parts. But there are disadvantages, like it might be oozing and you might have to really get those settings right to get the retraction and everything set to where it might not come out as clean as PLA. I'm sure, I bet it won't, but it'll be stronger and it'll have some other advantages. Another material is PETG or PET, and that's this material right here. This is much more bendy. It's not going to break. You're not going to snap this off. It's not brittle. It might break, but you could bend this. I see no, you know, it's eventually wearing down. I think I'll eventually break this off, but it's not brittle like PLA. It's not going to break. It's bendier. It is a little bit trickier to print with. With this, the suggested printing is 230 to 250, so it's a lot hotter, and you're going to get some oozing, some of that stringy filament where the print head travels, so you're going to have to adjust the settings on retraction speed and distance and some other things like that. You might not get, if you're printing little models, this might not be for you, but if you're printing something stronger like a clip or something that needs to bend like a spring, like I printed the Z-axis clip on here and it needs to bend to snap on there. With PLA, that might have just broken. With this, I know I can bend it back and forth and it's going to be fine. So this is more of a stringy, durable. This is PET or PETG as it's called. And it's not that much more expensive. This was from Monoprice for 20 bucks. This PLA, you'll get a range. You'll get all over the place. So TPE or TPU is very bendable, very oozy, so it's good for stuff like rubber stoppers or cell phone cases. If you see people printing off their cell phone cases, they're not using PLA unless you want that hard cell phone case or PET. They're using TPE or TPU because that's bendable, but with that you're going to get a lot of oozing and it's not going to be strong. So just know when you're ordering it, it's not very, these are the most common. The PLA is the most common, and then maybe the PET or ABS. These other things are specific for, you know, if you need TPE, it's going to be slow to print. You need a lot of retraction when you're printing it, or else it's going to be oozing everywhere and it can curl and get all over everything. So that's something else you have to look out for. There is material called PVA, and that is for structural. That's for a printer that has dual extruder nozzles or dual filament. So if you're printing a part and you need an overhang, if you just have one material, it prints a thin lattice to the point where it gets to that overhang and then it prints the part. Well, with PVA, you can print that material, and the thing about that is it will dissolve in water. If you have a very complex, like a lattice or a cube, and there's all this infill, you couldn't possibly get in there and break all that away, and you couldn't possibly print it because it would just sag, there's nothing in there. But you print with PVA, you dunk it in water and it dissolves away. So it's not really for a structural thing, it's for the lattice, the support structure, and when you want it to dissolve, it just dissolves away. I don't have that issue. This is a simple beginner printer. That's for a more complex dual extrusion printer. HIPS, HIPS, similar to ABS, but it dissolves in a limestone solvent, and that's also used for support material. But when you first get your printer and you read all these things that can print, you're like, wow, I can print with all this stuff. Some of the stuff isn't really useful. Foam or lay foam is similar to felt, but it's rubbery. It's kind of like a spongy material. I think it's a very specific type of printing material. So I haven't really seen it. I haven't looked for it, but I read that. I'm like, okay, I don't want to print anything spongy at the moment, but it would be for a cell phone type of case. Felty or felt lay. It's also a two-part material where one part dissolves, and it's good for things like porous, if you're printing very specific porous material that you want it to be squishy or dissolve. Like I said, there's also infused material where they'll have wood infused in the PVA, so you can print stuff that sort of looks like wood. Especially there's another thing that's carbon fiber reinforced PLA, where it has carbon fiber in there, so you can get really strong parts, but again, that's very abrasive and you need a special tip to print with that. So just know, you're like, oh wow, I can print carbon fiber, whatever. There's disadvantages to it, like it might be difficult to print, and you're going to need a different extruder nozzle. But you can see that that's just a few of the different types of materials you can print with. They're coming out with the carbon reinforced PLA and all sorts of stuff, and like I said, I have stuff listed on that this printer can supposedly print with that I couldn't even find. I couldn't find some of these materials, so I don't even know what it can do. But if you're just starting off, you can't go wrong with PLA. It's the most common, it's the most basic. It's gonna look good, and once you get good with PLA, then you can start getting into other materials. Like my second filament I bought was the PETG, because people said it's easy to print with like PLA, but it gives you that strength that PLA doesn't have. It's not brittle like PLA. So you'll move into another filament, and then you'll try something else. Like I want to try nylon next, or some of these new filaments from companies that they're just coming up with, where they're trying to get the best of both worlds. Easy to print with, but it has some other characteristic. Or maybe it's a little more complicated, but it gives you added strength. So, like I said, you'll start with PLA like everyone does, and most people never leave printing PLA, but you'll try to move to other things and try to experiment with it. And you'll find this is much harder to print with. To get it to stick on that first layer, PET is much harder. It needs that heated print bed. So, but you start with PLA because it's easy and it looks good, and then as you learn and get better, you'll try different materials and try to improve your 3D printed part. So I hope that helps explain some of the stuff that I've learned, that I've gone through and looked all these things up, and hopefully you can try some out, and you can leave some comments if you've experimented with different stuff. And like you said, ABS I have no intention of using, but let me know what you think. Well, I hope you liked the video you just watched. If you did, feel free to subscribe by clicking the button on this side. You can also check out all the videos I've done, the playlist from things I've built, things I've fixed, home repair, 3D printing, and on this side you can check out a recommended video similar to the one you just watched. And as always, down in the description I'll put a link to my blog, which has more pictures and more information about the video you just watched. Thanks.